If I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation.
It's my prayer that on this Thanksgiving, we begin to heal our divisions and move forward as one country, strengthened by shared purpose and very, very common resolve.
Donald Trump talked about putting Hillary Clinton in jail during the campaign, but now he's calling for unity and focusing on his policy agenda. And we're back now with the panel. So President-elect Trump has clearly reversed himself on his pledge, you heard there in the second debate, to name a special prosecutor, and as he also put it, to put Hillary Clinton in jail for her mishandling of classified information. He says she's suffered enough and he wants to move on. Jerry, what does that tell you about Mr. Trump's campaign promises? And what does it also say, and I thought Reince Priebus was trying to clean it up a little bit today, about his understanding of the independence of the Justice Department?
Well, look, I mean, the first thing it tells you is I think Trump supporters may be in for some disappointments here. If they took things that were said in the campaign literally, they're going to be disappointed, because it's not the only one. There's been some move back on climate change, the rhetoric about climate change, for example, maybe on trade, a little bit of softening as well. And I think that's kind of what happens in presidential transitions. You know, you and I were around long enough to remember that Bill Clinton promised a middle-class tax cut, and then in the transition decided he couldn't pay for it, and it went away magically. So these things happen. But I think there are going to be a fair number of those in the Trump world. I think the saving grace for Donald Trump may be that I'm not sure all the supporters of Donald Trump actually took literally all the things he said in the campaign, so they may not hold him to account letter for letter, but there are going to be some softening.
I thought the New York Times interview was actually very encouraging, though. I think when you go through it and you look at his answers, for a conservative politician to go into the New York Times, I thought he got most of them exactly right. On climate change, he says, look, we shouldn't accept this false liberal consensus on climate change. We should have a real conversation about what's going on in the climate, what is man's role in it, and what are the right public policy responses, and is the kind of damage done to the economy offset by any alleged benefit to climate change. I thought on trade, he gave a great answer. He said, look, I just got off the phone with Bill Gates. I got off the phone with Tim Cook, and I told Tim Cook the greatest moment of my presidency is going to be when Apple opens a factory here, because we're going to cut taxes and especially regulation to make it an environment that people want to build factories. And so I thought that as a conservative reading that New York Times interview, the headlines were absurd, and the headlines were what you would expect the New York Times to put out there. The policies, I thought, were very, very encouraging and very good, and shows the kind of growth of Donald Trump into a serious conservative politician.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got a bunch about the issue of, well, there it is. I don't even have to take the time, about Trump considering Mitt Romney for Secretary of State. James Dill tweeted this: how can you consider Mitt Romney when he has called you a phony, a fraud, and doesn't agree with you on almost anything? James, as our State Department watcher, how do you answer Mr. Dill?
Well, if Mr. Trump were indeed committed to Governor Romney as his selection for Secretary of State, and I think that's far from clear just yet, it would, I suppose, bespeak a certain magnanimity of character on the president-elect's part, and I think he's already demonstrated that with his selection of Nikki Haley, Governor Haley, to be UN ambassador, when, after all, she was not exactly a Trump supporter throughout the campaign either.
But I think beyond the rhetoric that Romney had about Trump during the campaign, there's a bigger question about what they believe on policy. If Romney decides that he wants to go forward with this and Trump selects him as his Secretary of State, Romney will be carrying out the policies of the Trump administration. And I think Trump needs to make sure that Romney is on his page, not the reverse.
And where that would be most clear would be Russia. During the 2012 campaign, Governor Romney famously said that Russia is the main geostrategic threat to the United States, and Donald Trump has sounded very different tones throughout this campaign on that. I would simply say also these tweets by Kellyanne Conway about Governor Romney in this selection.
Well, this is the thing I made the deal with Reince Priebus about. I mean, consider me old-fashioned, but the idea that a top transition advisor is tweeting out about all the conservative blowback about Romney, that's kind of unprecedented.
And we would be ill-advised to imagine that it was simply Kellyanne Conway doing it all on her own.
So you think this was Trump kind of trying to put out any support for Romney?
I have heard from sources in the Trump transition that it was an effort to nudge Romney toward withdrawing his name.
Why'd they ask him in the first place?
Well, look, it didn't make Donald Trump look bad to have Governor Romney coming all the way to Bedminster, New Jersey to be seen with him.
But look, I think that this is one of the important things that happens in a transition. You can use personnel decisions both to reinforce your policy, but also to sort of broaden out the base. And this was an unusual campaign in which there was a narrow base of support within the Republican Party. It is a good opportunity to broaden that out, and I think using some picks, maybe not Mitt Romney necessarily, but using some picks to sort of show that there's a broader base for the Trump presidency than the one that may have appeared within the party in the campaign is not a bad idea.
Michael, as a movement conservative, would Mitt Romney as Secretary of State give you heartburn?
No, I think Mitt Romney would be a fine Secretary of State. This is a pretty personal decision for President-elect Trump. I think one aspect, not just who is the Secretary of State, but how do they work as a team with the rest of the national security apparatus is going to be an important consideration. I think those are valid concerns. I think John Bolton would be fantastic in that type of role.
I want to turn to another subject, which I think, I have to say, frankly, I find astonishing, which is the recount. And here you had Donald Trump being asked, frankly, by me in the third debate about whether or not he would accept the results of the election and saying, I'll keep you in suspense. Now we have the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, initiating a recount in Wisconsin, talking about doing the same in Michigan and Pennsylvania. You can kind of understand it from her point of view. She's trying to raise money and build up her name. But Julie, now we have the Clinton campaign, the top lawyer for the Clinton campaign, saying they're going to participate. What do you make of that?
Well, there's a small legal aspect of this that I think is understandable, which is if there is going to be a recount pushed by the Green Party, you want to have your campaign represented. I think the Trump team will probably end up having a representative there as well to make sure that their interests are being monitored. I do think, though, that it is incumbent on Hillary Clinton to come out in some way and reiterate what she said the day after the election, which is that she accepted the results and that Donald Trump was going to be our next president. You're hearing that from the White House. I do not think that you are going to see a groundswell of Democratic support for this idea, but Hillary Clinton needs to do that. And if she doesn't, then I think we need to be as tough on her as we were on Donald Trump during the campaign when he questioned whether he would accept the results.
Yeah, I want to, let me, if I may, just to pick up on that, because the White House has been very definitive, both from the podium and also a paper statement in the last day or so, saying we accept the election results. We don't believe there was hacking. We think this is the correct result, not the right result, but the correct result. Do they have any heartburn about Clinton getting involved in this in some way?
I think if the Clinton campaign or other Democrats are looking for support from the White House for a recount, then they're looking in the wrong direction. This White House is fully focused on the transition to the Trump administration, and they know how dangerous it is, the same way it would have been if we were talking about Trump saying this, how dangerous it is to be openly questioning the results of the election, to be suggesting that there's hacking when both experts that the Clinton campaign has talked to and the White House and intelligence agencies have said there is no evidence of that right now.
The whole thing is just, it's a lot to take. I mean, the weeping and gnashing of the teeth from the left, if anything remotely similar had gone on from a Republican, especially Donald Trump, would just be endless. It would be, and when you want to look at why people across the country feel like cultural elites, like our media establishment, just don't get them, the notion that this is going on, the notion that Hillary Clinton is joining in, the notion that her campaign is going, it's just, stop it. Donald Trump won the election. Donald Trump is going to be the president of the United States. The alt-left needs to move on from this nonsense.
15 seconds.
It's worth noting the Clinton lawyer, the legal team, even while jumping in, said we recognize that vote margins of this size have never been overturned in a recount. So I'm not sure how seriously they take it.
I mean, we're talking at the very least in Michigan about 10,000 votes. And
more in the other states.
Yeah, even more in the other states. All right. Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday.